Welcome to another episode of Inspire People, Impact Lives. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick, and today we have a real treat for our audience. He is an expert in humanizing business and igniting human potential. He's worked with companies such as Nike, McDonald's, Microsoft. I mean, I couldn't say, I don't think, three bigger brands right there alone, Lonnie, but Express Brands and many others. He's the author of the acclaimed book, Red Shoes Living. Lonnie Mayne, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be with you, especially during these crazy and adventurous times.
It is. It is. Lonnie is an internationally recognized leadership authority, and we've had some good dialogue already just talking sports before the show. So we were getting into that because we figured that we could have just continued talking about that. But our object today is to impact as many people as possible. So want to get on with that. Lonnie, before I'm really excited to dive in with you today, but I always give you, the speaker, the guest, an opportunity to tell a little bit about yourself, your family, how you came to be the keynote and book author and all this stuff yourself. But I know there's the human element behind that. So I always give the opportunity to talk about your family and yourself and how you came to be where you're at today.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, it's an honor to be with you. And I hope, over the next period of time here that some of these things are helpful to your listeners out there. And I think they will be. So I had kind of an interesting upbringing. My father was a professional wrestler and passed away when I was 10 years old. And so I had, growing up, I had all these crazy characters that were either at our house or I was with my father at the wrestling matches. And, people like Andre the Giant, who used to stay at my house, and we lived in the East Coast, and we lived in Texas. My father wrestled Rocky Johnson, who just passed away this last year. That's Dwayne The Rock Johnson's father. And so I kind of grew up in that environment. And the impression my father made on me before he passed was how he treated people. A hard charging, professional wrestler and this bigger than life persona. But behind all of that was a man that really loved people and could get the best out of people and supported them. So that impression always stayed with me. My mother, she was the nurturer, and I learned a lot from her. And so when my father passed, my uncle, my dad's brother, who was a turnaround guy, stepped in. And in the summers, I would spend my summers with him and traveling, and got this great opportunity to fly on Lear jets and go to meetings with him. He was very, very inclusive. And even though he wasn't a professional wrestler, he was this executive, but he had the same type of demeanor as my father. And I watched how people responded to him. And so from an early age, I had these great examples of hard charging people that humanized the people they were around, and they saw the best in people and saw the human. And so by the time I, went to college and went through school, I thought, no matter what I do in life, wherever I end up, I want to show up that way. I want to be competitive, and I want to be hard charging, but I want to do it in a way that I can make a positive impact. And, so, just one thing to add to it, my grandmother, my father, and my uncle's mother had a quote that she told all three of us as we were growing up. And that quote was, treat those who have more than you as equals, and those who have less than you as kings and queens. And if you can live your life that way, it'll count for plenty. And, clearly I'm not perfect, I'm human, but that stayed with me. And it stayed with my father and my uncle as they were into their careers as well.
Unpack that a little bit, because I love that. And I think that, the quote that always stands out to me that is similar, but not the same, is you'll really be able to tell the character of a person by not how they treat their equal or above them, but how they treat the waiter or server, the janitor, the people below them. That's where you really see the measure of the character of a person. So I kind of thought of that as you said that, but I feel unpack your quote, your grandma's quote.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to that, because that's actually elevating it even further.
Yeah, it is. And I like what you said as well. So my grandmother, when she passed away here many years ago now, and it's kind of a funny story to me. Before she passed, it was my birthday, and she really couldn't get around all that well anymore. And she asked me what I wanted for my birthday. And I said, just a note, or, a book with something that you've written in it, and I wanted something that I could kind of hold on to. And so sure enough, for my birthday that year, she gave me a book. And on the inside of that book, she had a quote in there. And I'd have to pull it back out to actually read it. It's pretty long, but the premise of the quote was, in your life, as you move forward, don't let your ego get in the way. And if you do, somebody's going to beat it out of you. And so her whole thing was about, hard charging men and women. We do have these egos that we have to take into the arena, or however you want to approach it. But in her mind, there was a place and a time for that, and that you could show up as the best version of yourself and serve people and see people and be kind to them. So that it's been with me forever. She would talk to us about, if you go to a restaurant and the server is serving you, see that person as a human first, and someone that's serving you second. And just little things like that change everything. You think about what we're all going through across the globe now. And in my mind, that's more important today than ever. If we can see the human when we go to the grocery store, the person that's checking us out, that's somebody that's putting their life at risk on a daily basis to support their family. And so seeing that and understanding that, I think is critically important. So that's just always been part of it. And I think we've had this great equalizer with COVID and the pandemic, where people are starting to do it again. They're starting to see each other and support each other like I've never seen before.
Yeah, you're so right about we always consider frontline workers, or I think it's kind of like first responders, which they are. Right. And then you put in the nurses there, which are now even, I think as they should be, or should have always been glorified even further. But now that even down to the grocery clerk, which is for most people considered a remedial job for a 15-year-old, maybe a first job for a 15 or 16-year-old. And now you have these people that are, like you said, risking their life to allow us to get food back to our families and whatnot. So I love the quote, let's make sure I get it right. To treat those above you as equals and those beneath you as kings and queens.
That's right. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And you can kind of add your own version to that as you move forward. So
no, I love it. So I want to get this out there as you talked about your father. So Chad told me this ahead of time, and I just Googled him real quick. So because it was a little bit before my time, obviously I remember Andre the Giant, who was one of the greatest superstars of wrestling of all time. But Lonnie, the Moondog Mayne, right?
Yeah. Now I want you to know I took after my mother when you look at his videos. So.
I know, I see it. And there's videos on YouTube here, right? So the glass eating, raw meat chewing original Moondog.
It's awesome. Hard. It's hard to live up to that. And it's funny because even today, with the work that I do and people, that's the world we live in, we Google, and the first thing that comes up is a Wikipedia page of my father's, but it's got my picture on it.
That is the one downside of Google, or I should say Wikipedia, is it can be changed and altered by the general public. So you get that sometimes. All right. So, and obviously the family style, you living in Utah, Park City, right?
Yeah. Park City, Utah. Yeah.
3 boys and a princess.
3 boys and a princess they're all amazing in their own way. And all older now, which makes me feel old, but doing good things in the world. So, yeah.
So before the show, and as you just told us about your father, you told us a little bit about him, but what do you think is the most impactful lesson he placed on your life that you can talk about? Maybe your uncle, maybe is that same lesson you told us a little bit about, but I just kind of want to unpack that a little bit, because obviously he was so influential even prior to that death at 10 years old.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tie it to somebody in the keynote speeches that I give, I tell a little story about my father and the impression he had. And I talk about what I wanted to be when I was young. In fact, when you think about this question, when I ask that question, what did you want to be when you were young? Most people that I'm speaking to are not doing it. A lot of us wanted to be something other than where we ended up. And so then how do we have a meaningful career? How do we do that? If we wanted to be an athlete, we didn't quite make it. Now we find ourselves in sales or in business, or, there's all kinds of things. We want to be a doctor, lawyer, artist, dancer, whatever the case, but here we are. And so this whole concept that I created years ago is to try to get the best out of people, the human spirit, alive again, that little child inside of all of us, and bring that to the work that you do now, wherever that is. So what I saw my father do is he was doing what he loved. He loved it. But he didn't want people to put him on a pedestal. And so he would go out and wrestle and put his persona on, put his title on, just like we all do with our titles in business and all the things that we do. When he would come back into the locker rooms, when I used to get to go with him, My mother would allow me to go. My father would go out and wrestle. I always had to stay kind of back behind the scenes because it was a crazy environment for a young boy to be part of. When he'd come back in the locker room in these corridors of these arenas, he would ask the security guards to go find his fans, and of all kinds. And what was interesting about that is my father wrestled as a heel or a bad guy quite a bit. That was his persona. He played it well. I mean, from the ring, he could really taunt the crowds and work him into a frenzy where they just wanted to really beat him up. He didn't want them to really believe that that's who he was. And so every time I went to the wrestling matches with my father, the security guards would line families and children and people in wheelchairs and older people in this corridor. And my father would walk back through those doors, back in those days, sweaty and sometimes bloody. It was just a little different world. And he would turn back into the most beautiful human being you've ever seen. And he humanized himself, and he would get down on one knee and talk to the children eye to eye. I watched him he wore red wrestling boots sometimes. He would give those boots away, and that impression, I remember it when I was young. As I got older and I thought about it, I thought that's exactly what he was doing. And the quote that my grandmother would tell me, she clearly told him. So that was the impression that it had on me, is if I can rise to some definition of success, whatever that is, and still be like that's a good life. Mm-hmm. And then my uncle was the same, turnaround executive, CEO, even how he treated me. I think about my own children. Over the years, I've been pretty full throttle with travel, and I've tried to take them with me where it was appropriate and where I could. He saw no boundaries with that. So if he was having a board meeting and I was with him, I'd sit in the corner very quietly, and listen in on that board meeting. I've never done that. I've never had that, space. And so he taught me that. He taught me kind of there's never a wrong time. And he had tremendous respect for people, held people accountable to the highest standard, to do the work and achieve a little more. So the accountability was there, but I watched people when he passed away. I mean, they were, thousands of notes and hundreds of people that showed up and told stories about where, he got the best out of them and they loved him for it.
That's awesome. The thing I was going through in my mind is, because I've had some of those instances that you're talking about with your father, and you remember the lesson that comes from it, but I doubt you remember that necessarily in your teens or 20s. It's something as you matured as a man. I've had a lot of those over the last, I would say even like more so, even like the last 5 years, the back half of my 30s, now being 40. And you can think back to those times as a child and you're like, oh man, that sucked, or man, that was awesome. Mm-hmm. What did I learn from it? What did I take away from it? Like, what does this memory that's going through my head right now mean to me today? Yeah. How did I turn out to be the person I am today based on that, large experience or those little experiences that added up? And I think we miss that in our teens, 20s, and even sometimes 30s if we're not paying attention, or a lot of people do. Yeah. How do you go about, do you have a system to go about like some of those memories?
Yeah, I do. I like the question. In fact, as you were talking, I've really doubled down this year in 2020. I spoke at a high school here in Park City High, to some business kind of students, a program they have here. And it was a couple hundred of them that are serious about their careers in college. And at the end, we did a Q&A, and a young lady asked me that question. She said, what's your system? And then the second question was, what's been one of the more defining times in your life? And of course, when you think about that question, there's been all kinds for us, but 2020 by far has been that for me. And tying it back to your question, what I did, in March when everything started to shut down and we all started going through this, is I wrote every day in a journal. And sometimes it's one line, or sometimes it's a word, but I started to go back in time and pick up on patterns and memories and think about those, and one of the things I did is when I was in high school and different times in high school and all the way through college, I did it every day. If there was a thought on my mind, I would write it down. And it's what's developed for me is I've kind of gone back and found out where I started to become who I am today, and what people came into my life, what challenges I went through and how I got them, how I felt. I think as a society now with COVID, we've become more vulnerable, more open, less ego. we're still seeing a lot of negative noise out in the world. But for me, I quieted it all down and said, this is an opportunity, even though we have death and all this terrible stuff going on, that I may never have again to do this. And so every morning, I give you a little flavor. I wake up and I immediately just think I'm just, glad and grateful to be alive. I'm grateful for the hot water. I kind of go through this whole process of what am I grateful for? And what I'm grateful for today was different in March. I just see things differently. I'm grateful to be on your podcast and for the time and the conversation. So, I kind of flow into a moment of journaling. And when I say that, it's not arduous for me. I sit down and again, I might write about this podcast. What was the highlight of the day, or what did I learn? Or was there something new that Josh said that I really liked and I want to capture it in my notes? So just that process alone, and I do it every day, it became part of a system that I've had for a long time, but it was inconsistent.
Yeah.
So, that's really helped. And then we were talking with some leaders the other day about energy sources. And this is interesting because it ties back to gratitude, which is, by the way, the number one most common trait between hard charging, successful people, without defining success, whether it's money or a title or stature or whatever, just asking the question, gratitude became the number one behavior that successful people had. And so the way they look at the world, it's a mindset. So I wanted to elevate that in my own mind with all of this negative noise and challenge that was going on in the world. And so once I've done that, I've got a little workout. I have a treadmill in my living room now. COVID is kind of, it's created new rhythms. Have a gym up the street, but I do most everything inside, now that it's winter here in Park City. I was outside in the summer. And then the energy source, not to go too far with this, but it was, what are the things during the day that actually give me energy and that I can fill up that tank? And I mean, things like when the sun's coming up, and throughout the day, as I'm in my home office and walking around, the sun comes into the area in different places and there's a little bit of music playing. And if there's good food that I'm trying to eat and good conversations with people, all of these things become energy sources for us. So when something really challenging happens, we got a little more in the tank to get through it. And if we're journaling and we're looking for positive patterns and maybe even negative patterns, so we're aware of them, we know a little more about how to approach things as they approach us, So that has been my pattern. And, I know I was able to spend some time with your team, Chad, yesterday. Every conversation I have is a conversation to learn from somebody and receive some energy from them. It's not always me giving it. I can actually, receive it. And that's something else that I've learned is that's an energy source. Chad filled me up yesterday. Our conversation before we got on the air filled me up. So it's energy transfer. And so that's been kind of my rhythm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is there a way that you reflect back on those notes? Do you have a system for that as well?
I just go. So what I've said, I go back in time and just reflect. I'll sit in those. And what's been interesting for me, a friend of mine told me that when you've really evolved to what we call a centered place, your center, Josh, is going to be a little different than mine. In other words, what's important to you and what you're focused on and what also gives you energy. And so when I've gone back and looked at that, he said to me that if you continue to ask a question of when something challenging happens, what does this open up for me? So again, back to a mindset. It's not, oh, this is terrible, but what does it open up for me? So when COVID happened, I was like everybody else. I was really distraught, thinking, gosh, my business is going to shift. He asked me that question, what does it open up for you? That really started that pattern and journaling process. And what he told me is you've evolved to a point when you can go back into your journal and go to one of the most challenging moments in that journal, whatever it was for you, and read it and not emotionally respond to it, just consume it. So I remember the day I thought, all right, I wonder how far I've come, how strong I am. And I went back to a moment in time that was a challenge for me. And I read through that and I thought, I remember that. And I wish I would have done the work that I've done now back then to have gone through that, So he was right.
Well, I think this is so important I wish I would have known this when I was in my, teens, 20s, even early 30s, is like, don't miss the lessons by like pausing and reflecting.
Yeah.
Like what is this? Why did this memory just come to my mind? That's one of the questions I just, start asking myself. And sometimes you may need to pause what you're doing to be able to really reflect. And that's hard. I get it. Or potentially writing that thought down for a time later that you do have time to actually reflect on it. Like, why? There's a reason that thought came back into your mind if it was a memory from 10 years old.
Yeah.
There's some reason, I just personally believe that. Like, there's no way. I had this experience. I was working out one day, and I had an experience where I had this thought of early on when I was like 8 years old and I was learning to do a flip off the diving board. And I was in a meet and I didn't know how to do it. And they thought that, hey, if we just put him in a competition, because I'm a competitive person, that he'll just do it. What I chose to do was pretend to slip off the diving board and basically, fall into the water, not doing a flip.
Yeah.
And again, I'm like 8 years old. But why the heck would that memory come into my mind while I'm working out and I'm 30 something years old?
Yeah.
Like, and so I reflect further on that. And it was about trying things and not being afraid to try. And what that embarrassment did for me was force me to learn how to do a flip. And then eventually I learned how to do a double, or a 1.5, and then a double, and then a 2.5 much later on in my diving piece of it. But like don't miss those moments. And your system is great.
Well, and I'll give you an example, if I may, on that, just to kind of open up to that, because I love what you just said. With this time, it's made us all pause and have to kind of sit in our stuff. And when I was 10 years old, so here was a discovery in the journaling and everything that I did. When I was 10 and lost my father, his burial had just happened and we just had his funeral. And I was with my mother in the car and she was sad. And it was a turning point for me because I didn't want people to be sad anymore. I wanted to kind of get on the other side of this because it was a lot for me. Mm-hmm. And I looked at my mother as she was driving the car and I said, Mom, I want you to know something. We're going to be okay. Number one. And number two, I promise you that my father's passing will never have a negative impact on me. It'll have a positive. As I reflected on why I said that, I did say it because it was at 10, I started wanting people to be the best version of themselves and not be sad and not sit in things. It also propelled me into movement. So for 30 years, how I solved hard things is I just worked past them and over them and through them. And I never sat in them. I just kept going. I traveled 300,000+ miles a year. I worked from early in the morning till late at night. I did as much as I possibly could, so my mind never stayed idle. When COVID happened, I found myself sitting in all of that. And so the only thing I could do was talk to people about those moments or journal them and write them. And so that's what I did. And so now, when I talk to a lot of leaders that have done the same thing, we talk about elevation. And it's not elevation in terms of high performance, it's elevation of life. And how can we take this time now to improve, you working out and spending more time with our families. And I've got grandkids and being able to see them more, on FaceTime. There's so many things that have opened up. And I want to just share this with your audience. I think this part will be helpful. We had executives and executive teams reaching out to us saying, hey, we need some help. We've got some people that are going through some tough stuff, all kinds of stories. And so with the company that we started and the work we do, we came up with a thought. And the thought was, anytime adversity hits or an opportunity presents itself, we get this choice to either step into it or step away from it or step aside of it. When COVID happened, we didn't get that choice. It stepped into us. Mm-hmm. So all of us around the globe were in it. The second thing we have to do when that happens is we have to choose to step through it. And so we're all still going through the step through, and there's a continuum on that step through, where sometimes we're at the top end of it. Sometimes we slip back down, but we're learning, we're growing, we're feeling pain. Eventually though, with the right hope and the right mindset, we will step up. Yeah. And it's the step up for me that, here I am in December, where I was in March and April is not even close to where I am now, meaning how I feel. It doesn't mean I'm more successful or anything, but how I feel about life. So that 3-step thing, as we keep telling people, and it became a language for a lot of companies, that is, look, let's step in, let's step through it together, and let's step up. And that, just these little mantras like that have been really, really important to help people through.
As a military mantra, it sounds like of improvise, adapt, and overcome, right?
Yeah. Simple.
That's simple and awesome. While we're sitting here and I'm listening to you and I'm trying to listen intently, is talk about persistence really quickly. my 3-year-old boy. They learned how we downloaded Facebook Messenger that you can really do as a parent, really control.
Yeah.
It has a video function, and he's been blowing me up while we're sitting here talking. And obviously at 3 years old, you don't know, oh, dad must be busy. That's why he's declining my call. So he's literally called 8 times in the last this minute here. That's called persistence. The
See,
3-year-old knows that.
he's doing it. He's stepping through and stepping up. He's trying
That's
to.
right. So I want to transition more towards the Red Shoes Living and really get your context on that. But before there was Red Shoes Living, there was Stop After College in corporate America, and then startup. You want to take us kind of transition. You went through college and
Yep.
then into corporate America, which a lot of us do.
Yep.
And then you transitioned to a startup tech company before that.
Yeah.
What was that like, and what did corporate America really teach you to kind of lead into the rest of your career?
Yeah. So I was a new leader, coming out of school, and I had some of those core values and principles that were instilled in me, and not only from those mentors that I talked about, but many mentors, coaches, and, youth leaders all started to kind of feed into that. But when I got to corporate America, immediately started doing mergers and acquisitions. And I was one of the younger guys being kind of brought in and taught how to do that. So I had this great opportunity to get in at a high level and watch all this materialize. And we had just bought, we were a $2.5 billion company that grew to $7 billion through acquisition in 2 years. So lots of acquiring, lots of bringing companies together, lots of bringing cultures together. And what I noticed is when you do that, you're transitioning people's lives for a long time. Some people are being asked to leave the organization. Some people are asked to take on new roles or move or whatever the case. And it creates compression. It's a word that I started using back then. And if you just imagine standing in front of a room full of 800 people that are two different companies coming together for the first time, and you've let some of their friends go, and you've done all this change, the room literally just compresses. You can see it. You can tell there's fear. The trust is kind of gone. And so one of my first experiences in seeing that, we had a senior leader and a senior leadership team that was addressing that crowd at a big event. And we took a break about an hour into it. The senior leaders went into a room. I was the youngest one. And the other leader kind of went around and said, "How do you think it's going?" And to their credit, all of them were saying, "I can feel the tension, kind of the elephant in the room. We're not addressing it, whatever." And they came to me and said, "Lonnie, what do you think?" And I said, we're not addressing what they're thinking about. They're thinking about their best friend they played golf with for 20 years that just got let go, who's got a family and a new home. And here we are just kind of, praising those that are in the room. And we need to address the spirit of that room. Mm-hmm. So I opened my big mouth and he said to me, "I think you should go back out and say everything you just said in here." And I was like 23 years old. And I thought, I don't even know what I'm doing. How am I going to do that? But I did. And from that point on, I became that individual that would, when we got to that point, I would come out and say, "Look, this is what we understand. We have to rebuild your trust. That's going to take time, but we're going to do it. And we're going to work together. We know there's people who have been let go." That genesis was the genesis of what we call Red Shoes Living, which turned into something completely, larger as we move forward. So I used that. I used it in every company I went to, and we used it to hire, we used it to grow. So we saw the human being first, and then we started developing a philosophy, a mindset, and a framework around it. And it was all about how do we get the best version of every individual that we work with? And that, as a leader, that takes time and it takes energy to pull that out of people, and you have to build trust. And yes, you still hold them accountable, and yes, you can still be competitive. So when I got to the tech company, I stepped away from corporate, moved my family back here to Utah, which was home. And tech company, it was one of the riskiest things I ever did. There were 14 people trying to get this startup really up and running, and they weren't making money. I came into the company, invested in the company, and was literally number 14. So they had 13 people. And one day I was talking to our team and said, "Look, I've used for 20 plus years this philosophy, mindset, and framework to perform and to elevate and to have a quality life." And in that day that I was having this conversation, my kids bought me a pair of red Van tennis shoes. So I went from corporate wearing suits to a hoodie, a pair of jeans, your typical kind of tech look, and a pair of red Van tennis shoes. And I kept saying, we want to stand out in everything we do, from how we send emails to how we build our platform, to how we treat each other, to how we hire, to how all these things. We're going to stand out. We're going to keep going. And our head of marketing in our small little group looked at me and said, "I get it." I totally understand what you're saying. Every deliverable we have, we want to just exceed the expectation just a little bit more so it stands out in a positive way. And I said, that's right. He said, you want it to stand out just like those red Van tennis shoes stand out. And everybody kind of looked around the room and we all smiled. I said, that's right. And so the red shoes, they're simply a symbol, a reminder of what I wrote the book about and how we show up and how we behave now. And it became catchy. And then the second part to that, I'll take a deep breath. The second part of it was what we discovered is we created this framework of 5 behaviors. And we feel like these behaviors connect all of us all over the world. And it's a starting point. And what we said is that people are going to take this home with them. It's not going to stay at work. Many of the initiatives that we're taught, and I've worked with all the large consulting firms, all of which have helped me immensely in my own businesses. But a lot of that stuff that we were working with them on just stayed in the business. It actually didn't go back into their personal lives. That we wanted something that people could bring to work, increase their performance, increase their joy in their jobs and meaningful work, and also bring it home with them and personalize it and say the term of red shoes living. That's what we termed it. Whatever red shoes living means to you in a personal way, do more of that. And we will tie more of that back to the mission, vision, values of our company. That's an inspiring connection because many of us, as we have just the mission, vision, values in our company, it's inspiring to some point. We're striving together as a team and we're getting paid and to get there, but it can also be uninspiring. If you can bring the behaviors to the individual that are inspiring to them, so they can bring that to their work and start with that to support the mission, vision, values, now you've got something that you will achieve. And it's a performance-based program that is meaningful and it's happy and it's growing. And that's what we've used to compete. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about your first part that you're talking about and bringing the best out of your people. What if I'm a business owner? I know what I would say to this, but I really want your take on it. What if I'm a business owner who's like, yeah, that sounds all really well and good, Lonnie, but I just want them to show up and do their work. I want them to show up and do their job.
Yeah. Well, and so there are companies that do that and do it successfully, but it's a short slide, and so this is one of the things we've dealt with over the years is that question, and is it a warm and fuzzy thing? And is it soft skills? And I say, no, it's human skills and it's human performance. The response is always this. And I actually had 2 meetings this morning where these are 2 hard charging companies that both companies are very successful through the pandemic. It's just the nature of their business. And, we spoke to them both about a year ago and they were kind of questioning, is this something, can't people just come in and get it done and we'll pay them well and all this stuff? Until the wheels wobble a little bit, until you start to lose people, or you have a manager, a leader that doesn't put the red shoes living framework at the center and things start to go a little south. And so now they're thriving with this at the center. So here's what I would tell you. You and I spent some time at the beginning of the podcast using all of the red shoes living pillars. Your team, Chad, yesterday, I used the framework, mindset, and philosophy with him. It's a starting point because the starting point says if we can take our ego, which we have, and we have to have at times when we're getting to the top of the mountain, and just put it aside for a minute and let's connect as 2 human beings. Let me understand what's important to you, Josh, in terms of your audience and what you want them to connect with, right? And then you in return ask me the same question. So if I may, I'll just tell you the five pillars of the framework is the first one's awareness. We have to be much more aware today as a leader than ever before, aware of our own health. If we're going to take care of others, we got to take care of ourselves, aware of opportunities to serve, aware of opportunities to challenge people respectfully. Awareness has to go to a heightened level like we've never seen before. So you've got awareness, and we translate red shoes living into creating red shoes experiences or experiences that stand out, which are defined unique by all of us. So it's awareness. It's gratitude. We talked a little bit about that in some of the writing and journaling. So everybody has a story. So you and I immediately connected in the first 15 minutes because we started to connect with our stories, of athletes and family and whatever. And that we're human. That's why this is important. So then the fourth one is kindness and respect. So Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is a great example of this. He's a red shoes leader. He outworks everybody. He's up early. He holds his team accountable to the highest standard, but he's kind and respectful. So how do you rise to the top of whatever game it is you are and still remain kind and respectful? It's possible. And then the fifth one is putting yourself out there. So what that means, if I'm going to complete the cycle of Red Shoes living and creating a Red Shoes experience for you, Josh, I have to do something for you. I have to give you more than what you expected. I have to be aware of you. I have to be grateful for you in this time to be on the podcast. We have to connect on Everybody Has a Story, be kind and respectful. And then I'm going to put myself out there and do something for you. And that is what we put at the center of every communication, everything that we do.
That's awesome. I want to say on the awareness piece, one of the things that came to mind that you didn't say, but I know it's part of it, but like maybe it's just because of the experiences I've been dealing with young leaders lately that I'm trying to bring them up and coach them up in this, is awareness of the impact that you have as a leader on others.
Huge.
Like everything I do, everything I say has an impact on others. And sometimes that impact and intent don't match.
Yes.
And we got to be aware enough to realize when the impact of our message or our action didn't match the intent, and go, oh, hold on, that I missed there.
Yep. So, an enlightened leader is one that is aware. And I will tell you, 10 minutes before we went on the air with you and I came on, I was meeting with an executive that said over the last several months in their video meetings, their Zoom meetings, their leader, their managers, body language, rolling of the eyes when somebody talks, flipping their head back or throwing their arms up in the air has become such a caustic thing for people that it's being talked about in the organization. And in this individual's case, it was increasingly upsetting. So to your point, and my first response was, they're unaware. They're probably benefited out, assume good intent. I think they're unaware that they're actually doing it. They've probably done it when they're on the phone. Now they're on video. People can see them and it's part of their habit. So to your point, it's a great point you make. As a leader today, anybody listening in, we're all leaders, no matter who you are of something or, some situation. If you can increase your awareness the way you just said, and I have to do it too. My chief of staff on occasion will send me a text if we're on a video call. If I happen to look at my phone or if I do something that could be offensive or disrespectful, and she'll send me a text and say, your awareness is drifting. Stay focused. That may be one of the more important things today in the business world, is increase your awareness that everybody's stories are changing on a daily basis. And you really have to pay attention to them if you're ever going to get the performance out of them and the trust and the care out of them like never before. So it's a great point.
That's really good. The phrase that we use in our leadership room and our executive leadership team is "be where your feet are."
Yeah.
And I stole it from someone else. I have no idea, but where it came from. But it's just a quick reminder, quick phrase. It's like, hey, I'm on my phone. I need to put that away. Or, hey, I'm dazing off into space and someone's talking to me right in front of me.
Yeah.
So it's just be where your feet are.
Yeah,
be engaged, be intentional about the time. Hey, we're spending this time together. We're going to be as intentional as possible. So I was trying not to get frustrated with the 8 calls that were coming in as I'm using my iPad as my notes and I'm hitting decline because my son just doesn't know.
Yeah.
Right? So trying to be aware.
Well, actually what you did was Red Shoes. You created a positive experience for me, because if you wouldn't have given me the context, and I wasn't thinking this, but one could think if you're looking down or looking away that you're not paying attention. But what a Red Shoes leader would do, and you did it, is say, hey, just so you know, like I've got my son, my 3-year-old trying to get a hold of me, and I just want you to know that actually is Red Shoes. That stands out for the positive to me for 2 reasons. You just humanized it, right? It was fun. And then the second thing is so if you see me look away, I've had people say in meetings, look, I know it's disrespectful, but I'd rather tell you about it. I'm probably going to receive a phone call that I have to take. Just saying that is Red Shoes. It's positive. It's like, okay, no worries. When it happens, it happens. You've told me. So these little Red Shoes experiences can be small or they can be really big, but they're impactful.
So we just gave some lens on leadership. Can you give us some Red Shoes framework for culture?
Yeah. So the culture, it does tie back. Every company's got to have the North Star, the mission, vision, values. And so we take Red Shoes living and it becomes a language. It becomes a way of showing up. And we always say it's in support of what's the legacy culture that's there. We're trying to come in and elevate or reignite or even wake up the culture. And in a way where we have an opportunity to deliver these Red Shoes experiences every single day. And so most of the work that we're doing right now is taking companies that have been around and been successful for a long time, and we're bringing this concept in and saying, look, we're not here to rip and replace anything. We're here to get you thinking about it in a completely different way. So if you think of those 5 things that I went through as behaviors, you can take those and apply them anywhere, in any situation. And even if you're not directly achieving, the mission, vision, values, and you use those, eventually you will get there with that. So that became the heartbeat behind it. So now you go into a company, you work for your company, you're making good money, but you're applying these principles now, and standards start to raise, and life gets a little better for everybody. For you, as you're delivering, and as you're delivering, people are receiving, and they're going to start to deliver back. So it becomes this perpetual, growing system. The other point on that I would tell you is that because it becomes very personal to every individual, what's red shoes for you is different than for me. When you say something or you do something that I think is red shoes, it might be the art of the possible. It might be something I've never seen before, but I can borrow that. I can take that on. So the red shoes living mindset, philosophy, and framework is no longer mine. It's everybody's that contributes to it. And I probably should have started here, but the philosophy is really simple. It's, stand out for the positive in the work you do and the way you live your life. You get to define that. The mindset says, is what I am about to do red shoes? So if we already know the philosophy is to stand out for the positive, is what I'm doing, is it positive? Is it going to be red shoes? You type up an email, and you just before you go to send it, you say, is this red shoes? And if the answer is yes, it's as red shoes as I can make it, great. If it's not, maybe you double down a little bit, reread the email for tone or whatever the case is. So it shows up literally in everywhere. In finances, people are sending out invoices. They can say, hey, these invoices we're sending out, some of them have variable charges on that. That's probably not very red shoes, because people are getting these unexpected costs. Could we somehow figure out a way to adjust these variable charges so there's a consistent charge, So that language gets in there. And then when you go home, you get in your car, or in today's world, we just walk from our office to the kitchen. But as you transition from the professional to the personal world, you're starting to do the same thing. There's my neighbor's garbage cans. They're sitting out there. They've been out there all day. He must be somewhere. I want to be aware of that. I'm grateful for my neighbor. You kind of walk all the way through those 5 things. You go or pull the garbage cans in. And in that moment, your awareness has created a red shoes experience.
One of the things you mentioned when you were 23 years old and took a risk in giving that feedback, and as you're talking here, I'm like, okay, so in the culture, let's say you're a lower line employee, and you're intimidated by the bosses and whoever it might be, but you notice that there's something that's not necessarily red shoes in an email or in a customer interactions. Not everyone has the courage that you did as a 23-year-old to stand up and say, hey, I noticed this, and I'm going to speak up. And then they said, yeah, go get them, kid. Go tell them all that stuff you just told me. But I can imagine, and especially if it's let's say it's a female in a room full of men or something of that nature, how would you encourage them to approach that conversation with their leaders or bosses to create a better experience? Because in doing so, that risk could actually elevate their boss's view of them at the same time.
Yeah. And my first thought in response to that is always, it does start with the leader. And so, creating space. So you think about great coaches, that are out there that hold their teams accountable, hold the individual accountable, push them, but they create space for them to throw the ball, or whatever analogy, to shoot the ball, to kick the ball, whatever analogy you want to use. As a leader, we have to create space. And so part of, your original question was, in a culture, you have to create a space where people can fly. We call it facilitating flight. So as a leader, I'm going to hold you accountable to the mission, vision, values. I'm going to hold you accountable to what I think you can do. And I might even push you beyond that, because that's what, leaders do. But I'm going to create space for you to step into, to operate, to do your job, and then some. What you have to do is put yourself out there, which is the 5th pillar, and do it. If you don't have that type of an environment, and we go into environments where that's not the case, that compression that I talked about is there. So now you've got people on a scale from 1 to 10 that are probably 9s and 10s, 8, 9s and 10s consistently. They're operating at a 4, 5, and 6. So they're doing their job, and they're doing a good job, but they're at a 4, 5, and 6 because you are not facilitating flight. You're holding them accountable, but you're not giving them the space to come in and say, I've got a really good idea. It's one of the most powerful things you can do. And it takes time, and that also takes a little time, I think, to develop us as leaders to know that we can put ourselves out there and step into that space, and that no one's going to, chop us up if we do it. So this is the work. This is the deep work. And I will tell you, Josh, there are leaders and companies that are doing it so well. There are leaders and companies that during this time have recognized, because they had a little more time to think about who they were as a leader and their awareness kicked in, that they are not red shoes. And that if they could be more red shoes, how much further could they go? And oh, by the way, some of these companies are in trouble through COVID. And so they actually have to do it out of necessity.
Yeah.
So that's why we've been so busy in trying to just help people look at things in a little different way.
Yeah.
So
no, it's really good. So how about a red shoes framework for sales?
So it's the same. So this is what's cool. So it's the same framework. And there was a genesis in sales. So we started at the tech company. I didn't close out, but by the time I left, the company had evolved into 1,700 employees in 100 and something countries with 7 offices around the world. And what we did is, if I was asked to come into Nike, I was always the last pitch. And what I would pitch and talk about is red shoes. And I would say, you're going to experience a different service and a different thing from us. And by that time, they'd already experienced it. So we used it to compete. We used it to outsell. So the way we would look at it is we would use those pillars and the philosophy and the mindset and say, all right, we're delivering a pitch. We're delivering a proposal. Everything was about the language. Everything was about red shoes in our process of that. So if our competitors were coming in, we were doing more competitive analysis than anybody else. That was red shoes. I remember one time we went into a company and pitched them on the final day, and the CEO is a big company. And the CEO said, Lonnie, you and your team know more about my company than we know. And we would say, we call that red shoes. So it actually became a competitive set. Over time, what happened was so it started off with keep the spirit of the people alive. It went into a competitive program. Then it went into delivering an experience. So we say we launch it into leadership, we launch it into culture, we launch it into the customer experience, and then we launch it into life. And now it's just one movement. It never leaves. So, my kids grew up with this. My 20-year-old son, who turned 20 today, I just went to lunch with him, and he runs a ski shop here in Park City. He's one of the most red shoes 20-year-olds I've ever seen. Now, in his teenage years, he wasn't, but he's got this long blonde skier hair. And every time I go into that ski shop and watch him run it, and there's people from all over the world that come to it, they fall in love with him. And they do, because he pays attention. He goes through all those. He's aware. He's grateful. He connects with them on their story. He's kind and respectful. He puts himself out there. He pushes people a little bit with different equipment. People come back and ask for him every year, so it can be applied in every aspect of your life and every aspect of a business.
That's awesome. So how do you create it? So on that point, how do you create a red shoes experience for your kids?
So, so it's interesting. You talk about as we age, right? And I'll turn 53 this month. And what's red shoes for me as I interact with my children today is completely different. It's that evolution of being a father. And I'll answer it this way too. When I left the tech world, if going back to that scale of 1 to 10, my red shoes was probably a 6 or a 7. Once I got on the other side of the company, I realized that my awareness kicked in.
Out of 10?
Out of 10, 10 being top, right? And what was happening is I was getting so caught up in the noise of business, the KPIs, the metrics which we have to do, but I was driving the business the way a lot of us drive the business, and I was missing all those points. I did the same thing with my children. As I was raising them, I taught them to be kind and respectful. And the quote from my grandmother, I taught them all of these things, but I pushed them. I pushed them hard. What I've learned as they've aged and I've aged, that there's this concept that I wrote about in the book called tapping into the 20. And what the 20 is, if 100% is the complete person and 80% of us is the stuff we do every day, we got to go to the grocery store, we put gas in our car, we wash our clothes, we make our bed. It's just all this minutia stuff that we have to do. That 20% inside of us, though, is our deepest desires, goals, aspirations. It's our center that I mentioned to earlier. It's our workout. It's our children. It's our significant others. It's whatever our passions are. Yours is going to be different than mine, Josh. And so as a leader, I have to tap into that 20. As a father with my children, as I started realizing I wasn't tapping into their 20, I was kind of treating them all the same. Like, we're all going to do this. Well, my daughter was different than my oldest son, was different than my middle son. So one of the greatest gifts I've had as a father is being able to tap into their 20. I've got one son that's very artistic and, loves to make music. And all of a sudden I'm artistic and I'm into music with him. That's his 20. If I want to inspire him and support him and become his advocate, I have to understand what actually moves him.
Yeah.
So it took me a little time with my own children, and they're amazing, but they laugh at me now, because I know, the different groups, and my 20-year-old was just laughing at me. He's just like, how do you even know that group, Dad? I'm like, because it's important to you, right?
Yeah.
No different as a leader. We really, where it's appropriate, we have to tap into that 20% of what people's passions and interests are if we really want to inspire and motivate them.
It's so good, because I was thinking back as we were talking earlier about growing up in those life experiences, something that I've learned over time, and I have to do for my kids, I have to do for my wife, I have to do for Chad and the rest of the team. Like,
Yeah.
because my father never gave me affirmation, because his father never gave him affirmation, and I'm the oldest of four, I don't require it in my life. It's not a need for me. Like, Lonnie, you telling me that I'm a good podcast host or I'm a good person, like, that's nice to hear, but it's not something of my core needs.
Yeah.
Like, I'll be flattered if you were to say it, or if my wife were to say, hey, you look nice today, but I don't need that. But most people do.
Right.
And that was something I had to realize then, like, and especially with my kids, is like, look, my dad was a product of his dad.
Yeah.
And now I'm a product of my dad. But we have a choice to change that pattern as well. Yeah. And so, as you said, they're tapping into that 20 is a choice to change and be like, hey, we were conditioned a certain way. And by the way, I don't want to make my dad sound mean, like, he's gotten much better and we have a very good relationship.
Yeah.
That was just part of the things we realized as growing up. So that tapping into that 20 you say there is just so key, is like figuring out what makes your kids tick. And then also figuring out, like, your core. What do you want to leave with your kids? Like your dad and your uncle left for you, is like, what values do you want your kids to hold? And make sure that that's what you're imposing, not maybe a bad trait that it was imposed upon you by your parents.
That's right. Yeah. And, and I think in listening to you too, and this is what's great, if we had your entire audience, if we had the opportunity to ask them this one question, so far, what have been the secrets to your success? It was a program I ran in my tech company where every new employee on Monday mornings to the entire company presented for 20 minutes the secrets of their success. It was one of the most successful programs that we did because people felt seen. They got to express that, and we learned. We could sit in that room and say, gosh, Josh just said something he was taught by his father or mother or whoever. It's brilliant. I want to take that on. So that's that type of an environment is starting to happen more and more too, where people are inclusive and they're sharing and they're open, and they're vulnerable, and we're all growing together now, so it's really a great time to pay attention to good people and to listen and to grow.
Yeah, that's really good. So I want to, before we get into the word game and as we wrap up here, what would be a piece of advice that you would give everyone? So we're not out of COVID yet.
Right.
We're at the end of the year where people start reflecting and feeling grateful about the holidays or the family or what they do have. Hopefully you are. But we're approaching 2021 where people start thinking about their goals again. So where I feel like we're in this weird period, right? Like a lot of people haven't realized, either they have or haven't. And I talk to a lot of people now that seem like, 2020 is almost over.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here going, well, what's going to change?
Yeah.
Like, we're not out of COVID yet. Like, yes, vaccines on the horizon. There's some positive news with other stuff going on, but we're not out of it yet. So unless we personally change, unless we personally see things differently and choose to do things differently, 2021 may or may not be better.
Yeah, there's no
I guess I'll stop giving context and let you speak to that.
Oh, I love it. It's I was with a group of leaders at an event, socially distanced around a campfire last weekend, and these are people that have done a lot in their lives, and I kept literally saying, we need to change the conversation. And the conversation was, I call it being in the barrel. It was being down in the barrel, just talking about doom and gloom and all this other stuff. And I said, look, I really do believe there's going to come a time, with all due respect to the tragedy and to the death and everything, where we look back and say, gosh, I wish we had that time again. we're not going to turn the corner in 2021 and things are going to be different. I know people are talking that way. So what I would say, what I have learned is that, the new is the new. It's why we came up with step in, step through, and step up, because if it's not COVID, it's something else. If there's other sickness, there's your car breaking down, there's financial challenge, there's all kinds of stuff that, somewhere along the way, as resilient people, just like your 3-year-old is so resilient trying to get a hold of you, we figure out that we can get through things. And so if we do the work, it's what I call doing the work. If we continue to do the work to step up, when bad times happen, we can name them and say they're bad and, it hasn't been ideal, and we press on and we get through them. But, I can't think of a time. I just lost my brother to a stroke 2 years ago. And as I think back on it, what I had to do was step into it, and he was in neurocritical care for 9.5 weeks. And we finally, had to take him off life support. It was a bridge too far. And that 9.5 weeks, I stepped through it. As I look back now, as we do, 2 years later, I stepped up. I've become a better father, a better friend. My health has become better, because of it. And so that, for me and for many leaders, is the key. Doesn't mean anything that comes our way in the future isn't going to be difficult or hard, or that we're going through hard things now, because we're all grieving something, but we're resilient, and this is the question I would end with in terms of that. What do we know to be true? So when you ask yourself that question about yourself, what do you know to be true about me? What do you know to be true about Josh? Well, I'm resilient. I don't need affirmations. I don't need whatever those things are. Keep those close to your heart right now as you're going through them, because we know we're going to get through this. We do. Generations before us, with the oil embargoes and the Great Depression and September 11th. I mean, all these things have been tragedies and difficult, but we know what we know to be true. We're strong and resilient human beings around this world, and we make it through, and we learn and we grow and we develop and we become better for it. We just have to get through it.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. And I think about, like, if we were to toss away the year, all the bad stuff, we toss away the good stuff too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I was paddleboarding almost every morning because it was my socially distancing thing here in Park City. And I ran in the mountains when I could go outside. I'd step outside of my studio office and look up in the sun. We all learned that we could work with our children running around and dogs running through, the Zoom and video. I mean, there are so many things that it opened up for us, and it's just perspective. So.
And frankly, we wouldn't be having this conversation today because Chad and I were doing everything in person.
Right. Yeah. Look what that opened up. It was, a gift for me to be able to do this, with you.
So it's been fun. All right. So I want to be respectful of your time. So let's get into the word game, and then we'll get into how people can follow you and get into more Redshirt living.
Yeah.
But I think Chad's got 9 or 10 words here. Again, the rules for the audience for Lonnie is he's going to give a 1-word or short phrase response. Only big rule is he can't repeat himself. Ready to go?
Let's do it.
Fear.
Always there. Always put it in perspective.
Courage.
Wow, I paused on that. The pause is just everything we've all gone through and the courage that we've had. So what I was going to say is sometimes we got to dig a little deeper.
People.
Beautiful.
Gratitude.
With me every minute of every day.
Trust.
Everything if you want to fly.
Pain.
Builds us.
Life.
More to live, more to see, more to do.
Death.
Closing chapter of hopefully a great life.
My 2 favorite, inspire or inspiration, however you want to take that one.
Wow. So I would say both. Love to be inspired, need to be inspired. And inspiration comes from things today that I never thought they would come from, or it would come from.
All right, last one, impact.
we all need to be making a positive impact.
Agreed. All right. Favorite book of all time or most recently read that you want to give a shout out that's not your own?
How'd you know I was going to go to my own? Wow, let me think about that. So I'm reading a book right now by Sarah Blondin, who's a meditation expert. And, through this, I've actually learned to meditate, as a way to kind of slow my pace down. And I'm really enjoying her book. Sarah Blondin is her name. And I don't have the title, but I think it's Getting Into Your Heart. And she's done a really nice job with that book.
Good. So how can our audience either get in touch with you if they want to hire you, or follow you, or follow Red Shoes Living in general? What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so the websites, redshoesliving.com or lonniemayne.com, they both point back to the same location. Our book is on Amazon. It's on the website as well. And then you can find us on Instagram. We're trying to repurpose other people's Red Shoes content, our own content on lonniemayne.com, as well as Lonnie Mayne, at Lonnie Mayne, and at Red Shoes Living as well. So we're kind of out on all the social channels, and please find us.
Good. Well, it's been a pleasure having you today, Lonnie. This has been fun. I love having guests like you that I have no context about, really, because again, not being local, like in Madison, it's like 2 degrees of separation, but not being local, it gives me an opportunity to meet and have a conversation and learn from, a stranger that once was a stranger, now a friend. So it's been a great hour of time, and I know our audience is going to get a ton out of it. So I really am grateful for you and the time that you put in today, or set aside for us today.
Well, likewise, Josh, thank you. And to your community, great to be with you today. And I wish everybody a healthy holiday season, and all my best.
Absolutely. Well, everybody get out there and inspire and impact. Have a great week, everyone.